What's up, everybody? My name is Steven Hyder. My co-host over this way is Hunter Doyle, and together we form the Analytically Incorrect podcast. Hunter, what's up today, man? How you doing?
I'm doing well, Coach Steve. The James Harden jersey just came in the mail today, so a little bit off topic, but I'm excited about that. Excited for Friday, but I'm also ready to talk some football today.
Just a few news and notes. So I have made a guide for everybody. If you guys want to see what I deem the top 5 available linebackers inside of this 2022 free agency class. Mind you, we don't know who's really going to be a free agent when it gets around to it, but as of today's date, that is linked down below. I will be creating. So if you guys sign up for that, guys, you will be enrolled into basically a weekly newsletter. And from that, guys, you're going to get safeties is going to be one of the next ones up. Corner, defensive line, edge rushers, wide receivers, tight ends, all that stuff's coming up, guys. So if you enroll in that, you'll definitely get those emails from me, and there'll be some correspondence back and forth with that, guys. All right, y'all. Today's topic, we're going to talk about the offensive side of the football. So we're going to talk about 5 players or 5 position groups, or just how you improve this offense, right? I mean, just how do we make this thing just a little bit more better in 2022? Where do we get that incremental increase in play? So I'll start off by just asking a very generalized question, Hunter, which is, what do you deem to be the biggest needs on this football team?
Yeah, I think that wide receiver, I think you still kind of need that boundary X type of guy. Without getting too technical, I think you could add, another player to that group, maybe a couple. And we talked about it in the chat a lot this offseason, especially after the playoff game. TE2 is a really big need, I think, underrated need on this football team, just kind of overshadowed by the defensive needs we talked about yesterday. But I still think it's pretty important, and we'll get into that. And then I think, you can always add to the trenches. I think that's not the biggest need, but I think you can always add there. And same with running back. I mean, there's always a few guys you'll look to add and try to upgrade there. But I would say wide receiver and tight end 2 are the biggest spots on this offense I'm looking to improve for this season specifically.
Yeah, I definitely think that there's pretty big needs here, right? Tight end 2, as you stated, like if Dallas Goedert goes down, I think we have a general problem on our hand here. I think that could be a really big issue. Outside of tight end 2, I would also say that I don't know what to feel about the running back room. On paper, it looks good, but I don't know about the longevity of the players there. So is Miles Sanders going to be around past 2022? Are we going to bring Boston Scott back on that? I believe he'll be a restricted free agent, an RFA tag.
Yes.
What do you do with Jordan Howard? I love Jordan Howard when he's in games. He's definitely helps keep the offense on pace and keeps it on schedule, but he's injured a lot. The last 2 times that he's had a major role in Philadelphia, he's given us production when he's on the field, but keeping him on the field has been a problem. So I don't really know what you do at running back. I think that this could be a year to where maybe you do have to look at those alternatives. Maybe you do have to start trying to figure out the longevity issues at that position group and what you do there. I will say that boundary side wide receiver is a definite. I think we need that, that mistake eraser. We need that guy like Alshon used to be when he was good for Philly. When Alshon could go out there and make a quarterback's mistake look good. You need that guy. You need that guy with a good catch radius, strong hands, can run those in-breaking routes, can help you move the chains. We need that guy. We definitely need that guy in the offense. I still think that this Eagles offense has been searching for the longest time for explosion from the slot. They got a little bit of it last year with Quez Watkins. I think there's a debate going on internally of whether or not Quez Watkins is a natural slot receiver or if he's more of a flanker. I tend to see him more as a flanker personally as well, but I think that he's better at the slot than maybe some people have led others to believe. I do think that he's been more than serviceable in the slot. I mean, he's given us a ton of production from that. But I do agree with the general consensus, which is outside of Greg Ward Jr., I don't really know that we have a slot receiver on this team, not a natural one. A lot of people talked a lot about Jalen Reagar, but Reagar's lateral movements were not very well. I mean, he did not test well there. His lateral movements were a little bit more appalling to me than that 40 time was. The 40 time was, okay, he put a little size on to try to show that he could beat man coverage, which is a completely flawed concept at the combine. It's not how you beat man coverage. Like, your size plays a role, but it's not the definitive factor to that. and it took some speed off his 40, but the lateral movements, that's what scares me about him, because I don't think he's a slot guy either, personally. I think you could make an argument that a Christian Kirk or a Wandale, in the draft, from Kentucky. Wandale Robinson, I believe is his name.
Yep.
Look, those type of guys will give you a ton of explosion out of the slot. Sky Moore give you a ton of explosion out of the slot. Like, I definitely think that you could improve the slot, and then you got two outside guys. Maybe not ideal. I don't know that you necessarily got those mistake erasers, but I do know one thing is that Quez can beat man coverage, and I got full faith that Devante Smith can gain separation. He knows how to separate versus corners. So is it the most idealized world? No, I'd like to have a Mike Williams personally, but it's not the worst reality we've ever faced at wide receiver. I would say that the D Jackson, the Macklin years, there wasn't really a true X receiver on that team. It was just two very talented players. So I'll ask you, well, let's start with tight ends, man. I don't want to go to wide receivers first, because then everyone's going to tune out real quick on this.
Sure.
You guys got to wait for wide receivers. Tight end. What are the names that interest you? Who are some of the names that interest you at the tight end position?
Yeah, I like Mo Alley Cox, not only because of his connection with Sirianni and Jason Michael, but also just his basketball background. It kind of shows on the football field how he's able to go up and get the ball down the seam. And I think that the scheme was a little bit limited last year because of the lack of 12 personnel guys we had. As you said, Jack Stoll and Tyree Jackson and whoever else, Jason Kroom, whoever you want to throw in there, no Togiai, those aren't guys you want to really put on the field that Dallas Goedert goes down. And I do think with the run game too, I think Jeff Stoutland would like to have some more 12 personnel out there. I don't know him personally, but that's just kind of my gut feeling. So Mo, I think, would be, a nice addition to the group. You mentioned someone who I didn't even know was a free agent before we started, CJ Uzomah from the Cincinnati Bengals. I don't think he's necessarily a starting tight end, but I think he's one of those guys who you put him in a secondary role and you can kind of sneak him out, especially on play action, I think, a little bit. He's a guy who you sneak out into space and he can get some yards after the catch. And every so often, he'll just kind of have a breakout game here and there where the matchup just kind of favors him. And I think that's important to have a guy like that who can, kind of take the load off of Dallas Goedert the same way Dallas Goedert kind of took the load off of Zach Ertz. And as far as other names go, I know Max Williams has kind of been mentioned as a blocking option. I'm also really interested in, free agency happens first, but if we don't really address it in free agency, I am really interested to see the names in the draft. I think there's a lot of guys in the draft coming up this year. I'm not going to mention all of them, but just a few names like Trey McBride, I think would be a really nice fit in there. Cade Otton from Washington, I think would also be a really nice fit, guy who's pretty sufficient as a blocker and receiver. There's some names out there in the tight end class who I really like this year. So those are kind of the names that interest me. And, I think that this offense definitely needs a TE too with how they're going to function.
I agree. This is a very good year that to need production from your tight ends, because you can find it in the draft. This is a very good tight end draft, in my opinion, as well. There's also a very good free agency class at tight end as well, where you can, assuming these guys, don't get re-signed, there's some talent out there, guys. There's some definite talent. I mean, you got some high-end guys like, your Zach Ertz, veteran guy. I'm not saying that's a possibility for the Eagles, but I mean, if you're a team looking for a tight end, you got Zach Ertz floating around here. You got Mike Gesicki. You got Dalton Schultz. You got CJ Uzomah. You got Rob Gronkowski, who may or may not retire. Not too sure what he's going to do there. Jared Cook is available. David Njoku from Cleveland's available. There's some good ones. And then you got guys that maybe a little bit lesser known by people that I think would play a really good role in Philadelphia. I mean, you got, Ian Thomas has had some years here and there where I think he could be a really good, solid number 2 tight end. You got Robert Tonyan out of Green Bay. I think could make a really good 2 or 3 tight end. Donald Parham, the guy who cooked us from the Chargers, he's a free agent. He would make a ton of sense, to be quite honest. I mean, Ricky Seals-Jones, who kind of got, buried for a long time inside that Washington football team's roster. But when he got the opportunity to play last year, he really showed he could play. I mean, he's a pretty decent football player, to be honest. Jeff Swam, I believe he played with Dallas for a few years, played Tennessee most recently. Fairly good guy. You got Ferkser from Tennessee is available. I mean, this is a really good crop of tight ends here. I mean, you could definitely pull a guy out of here that can play the number 2 role. I definitely think that, Durham Smythe from Miami, another team that had an embarrassment of riches at tight end. Smythe is a really good tight end 2 option. There's a ton of serviceable guys that you can pull from free agency. Going back to the draft, you got Cole Turner out of Nevada, converted wide receiver, gives you, little intrigue there. He's not an inline blocker, but he's a full effort blocker. I think he's a better blocker than a lot of people would probably expect from the guy of his, his frame. Tall guy, 6'6", but only 240, but he gives you full effort in the blocks. Another guy that I'll say is Kohler from Iowa State. I think he's a very, very well-rounded tight end coming into this draft. I think he can block. I think he's a good receiving target. I love the fact that his offensive coordinator was the former tight end coach for, Indianapolis. So there's an obvious connection back to Philadelphia. So, I definitely, I think there's some talent here. I definitely think there's a lot of opportunities to upgrade tight end too. Now I'll switch gears a little bit and I'll give you a chance to talk. I know that you're pretty big on Kohler as well. Did you want to add a little bit about Kohler?
Not too much. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. He's, like you said, he's a really, really nice tight end. Big body too. Like if you can tweak his game a little bit and, kind of get him up to speed with, recognizing stuff and just a little bit of football IQ stuff. That's a guy who, again, I think a big thing is these teams just kind of bracketed Devante and Goddard in the end zone or in the red zone. And I think getting another big body like that, and we'll get to receiver too, getting a guy like Charlie Kohler can kind of help take the burden off a little bit of either of those guys, I think.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think that's very much true. The next position group I'll talk about, I think is a little bit more internal to the Eagles before we even get into a discussion about free agents, which is what do you do at right guard? Because if you can keep certain guys healthy and on the football field, I think there's talent in Philadelphia. I definitely think we have some internal in-house solutions that could happen there. The problem is that the most readied player there has been injured a lot. And I don't know what you do about that. I don't know how you get around that fact, right? And then you already got the complexity of what you do at center. But assuming Kelsey is going to 1,000% be back, what do you do with the situation with a guy like Isaac Seumalo, who he's probably not going to start at left guard now? Very versatile guy. He's probably a natural center, but probably could give you some competition at right guard. Then you got Jack Driscoll. What do you do between those two guys? How do you see that kind of coming out? Do you think the Eagles are going to try to actually add a right guard, or do you think they're going to look at Seumalo and they're going to look at Driscoll and say, whoever's the better player is going to come out the starter here?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, and I don't want to compare the two situations. I think they're completely different, but they did kind of let Dillard and Mailata battle it out last training camp. So I think it's a real possibility. I don't know what Seumalo's history looks like at right guard or what his comfortability is there. I imagine he can slide over there. You might have some information on that. I know you kind of, are in the know on what different positions these guys can play. But I think Seumalo could be intriguing as a trade piece. You just had the Bengals who, they were just atrocious, obviously, on the interior, especially on the offensive line. They could, definitely benefit from adding a guy like him. There's definitely suitors, but I also think Seumalo, before he went down, was, really performing well over the past year and a half or so. And I think that's a guy you might want to keep around. He's talented, and you have him under contract right now. As far as Driscoll goes, really good in pass protection. And I think even against the Saints, I think PFF graded that as his best run blocking game. So we are seeing some improvement there. And, well, like you said, though, he's been banged up a couple times, and a lot of people are wondering if just kind of like moving to the NFL. I think first year it was kind of suspected. He's moving to the NFL. There's a lot of guys that just the wear and tear gets to them in their rookie year. Now it's the second year in a row he went down with the season-ending injury. So there's a real concern there, and you might want to let them battle it out, and then you have one of the guys is deaf, and then if one of them goes down again, then you have some help there. But God forbid both of them go down. That's also a real possibility. So I think they are gonna stand pat and keep these guys, unless maybe an offer they can't refuse comes up for Seumalo. But I envision them letting these two guys battle it out as of right now.
See, that's kind of where I get the feeling too, but I also have concerns just like you do that both of these dudes have struggled the last 2 seasons to stay on the field. And as good as Seumalo has played outside of 2017, when he was really in a reserve role in 2019, he has not stayed on the football field. And that's a bit of a concern because the talent is there. I mean, there were times in 2019 he really frustrated me because I thought that he lacked strength and was getting pushed around a little bit. But he seemed to kind of shore that up in 2020 and 2021. Just couldn't keep him on the field. That's the question I have as well, Hunter, is are we really confident that we're going to get better at right guard by drafting a guy? I'm not saying the Eagles shouldn't focus and try to draft a guy just because I do think the injuries are a concern. And I do think that a team might move you off of a guy like a Sayamalu. I don't think the Eagles would be willing to trade Driscoll just because he's a five alignment player on the line. He can play pretty much any alignment. But I do think you could persuade the Eagles to move Dillard. I do think you can persuade the Eagles to move Isaac Sayamalu. I'll ask you, though, do you honestly see that kind of movement coming from the Eagles? Do you think that we'll see multiple guys get moved along the offensive line?
You mean in terms of trade?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't. My gut feeling tells me they're not going to let go of Sayamalu. I think they like him, and I think he's showed that he can play, like you said. Obviously, 2019, especially that Falcons game, is one that really, really just comes up in my mind against Grady Jarrett that he struggled in. But like you said, we saw improvement, and I think they are going to keep him around. They paid him for a reason, and I think they're going to want to try to make it work. I really don't think that they're going to be moving Sayamalu. Dillard, I could definitely see. I think it's nice to have that depth there, but he only plays one position, and another team could certainly use him as a starter. So I think there's a good chance they move off of him. But as far as Sayamalu goes, I don't know why. My gut just kind of tells me they're going to hold on to him. And like you said, I don't know that you necessarily get better by drafting a guy this upcoming year.
Yeah, and that's a fear I have is that, there's two names I've heard a lot that get linked to the Eagles. I think both players are good players in their own right. And I think if they're in the right scheme and the right situation, could be really good football players. Tyler Lindenbaum, I think if you have a guy where you're just asking him to square up and maybe work his way to the second level on a zone system, he's pretty much the best zone blocking interior offensive lineman in this draft. I don't think that's, I don't think that's a hot take at all. But, I don't think that he's a guy that's going to do a lot of, gap assignment stuff. You're not going to pull him on the outside. I don't think his release is anything close to Kelsey's. I think that's been overstated. I think people are just looking at the physical stature and the size and the just toughness of the player. He's tough as nails, even though he's a little undersized. And they're comparing it to Kelsey, but the movement skills I don't think are the same. In terms of Kenyan Green, who's the other guy that I've heard mentioned a lot for the Eagles in the first round, love the mauling aspect of this guy. This guy's a fighter. He mauls people along the line. He's not athletic, though, guys. This is not an athlete. This is just I'm bigger than you, and I'm going to put you on the ground. Give me your lunch money type situation here with Kenyan Green. I don't know that he's the right fit for Philadelphia, but to be fair, Brandon Brooks was a great athlete. Brandon Brooks did over time become a guy that could pull on the outside. They did use him in some pulling situations. But to be fair, you don't have to pull all five of your linemen. Not all five guys have to pull. He could just kind of be that hook defender, the hook blocker that basically he creates that wall to the inside there and allows your other guys to pull around. That's always a possibility. They could do something like that with Kenyan Green, but I don't think he's the best fit for Philadelphia, although I think he's a very good football player that I think could have a possibility of being undervalued potentially, by some organizations. Because I do think that if he was a little bit better of a mover, if he had a little bit more movement skills, I think that guy's probably clearly a top 20 pick. But because he lacks that, you're hearing more so the back of the first round, high second round kind of valuation for him. What are your thoughts on those two players in particular?
Yeah, I'm a big Linderbaum fan. I think he did a really good job at Iowa. Again, like you said, undersized guy who there's very, very few times where he gets knocked back. There are instances, but the fact that he's able to kind of, anchor and hold his ground, especially like you said, like with Kenyan Green kind of just opening those lanes rather than having to be a puller. I think Linderbaum does a really good job of that too. So yeah, I that's a really good point that you made about Kelsey that I didn't really think about. I think it's easy to watch, at least this is me included, kind of watch Iowa run some wide zones sometimes and watch Linderbaum pull a couple times and think that he is sufficient at it. But yeah, I think that's a really good point you made that I didn't consider. And as far as Kenyan Green goes, yeah, I haven't watched a ton of him, but like you said, I've heard a lot of the, every time you hear a prospect like him come up, you're going to hear about the size and you're going to hear about the pancakes he has and everything. And yeah, like you said, it's not that he has to be a puller, but I think that is kind of an added bonus you get, or not even added bonus, like with the Eagles, with how much variety they like to have in the run game. I think it's something that would just kind of help them to diversify things and keep other defenses off, like on their toes. So I do think that's an important aspect coming into the Eagles to have. I don't think it's a necessity, but I do think that's something that kind of turns me off a little bit of him. Like you said, it could develop over time, but yeah, he's still a bona fide first round pick in my mind, though. At probably around back end of the first round, like you said, I would probably have him around there. But yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on both of those guys.
There's one player in a fantasy world where he slips in this draft, which it's not going to happen. I wouldn't be shocked if he's not the first offensive lineman taken, but let me live in my world of dream for just a second, guys, as an NC State guy. Ikem Ekwonu, if that guy fell to 15, we don't need him. We don't. It's an embarrassment of riches. I'm taking him. That dude in the running game is just special. What he does to guys is special. You can play him on the outside as a tackle. You can absolutely bounce him inside as a guard. I think you can play 4 out of the 5 alignments. I followed him. I'm fairly familiar with him. I don't recall him ever really getting any kind of time or reps at center. I could be wrong. I'll have to go back and look through, but I don't think he ever really had an opportunity to show that between high school and, college. But that's a guy that, yeah, that's the one guy. Like I really feel like I would jump on the opportunity if it presented itself. I saw a few mock drafts where a guy like mock drafts, guys. It's not reality. It's a mock draft. But Charles Cross has fallen in a couple of the ones I've run, and I'm like, really? Because if Charles Cross hits 15, that almost feels like a situation where you draft a guy just to potentially trade him. Because that guy's got value. He can play. Like, I don't think it would happen, but, I do think it is a real possibility that between 15, 16, and 19, one of these offensive linemen will be undervalued somehow, some way, and might be sitting there between those 3 picks. I definitely think it's a possibility. I don't know the Eagles will make that pick, but it is a real possibility. I could see it happening. I could definitely see, especially if you're talking about more of the interior guys, right? I mean, I love Linderbaum. I think Linderbaum, if you put him in the right scheme, that guy's he's a Pro Bowler probably. But, centers don't traditionally go in the top half of the draft. They just don't. I think the last time a guy went, pick 18 or as high as 18, I think was 2011, I want to say, somewhere in that area. So, I mean, it's been a long, long time. I mean, normally centers don't go that high in the draft. We'll see. I mean, Linderbaum might break the mold, right? We all talked about last year with Devante Smith and these, and all these wide receivers. I mean, we talked about the fact that the Eagles had really only drafted 3 positions in the top half of the draft, top half of the first round, I should say. They only really drafted defensive linemen, whether it's a D tackle or an edge rusher, and quarterbacks, and then offensive linemen. That's it. Tackles in particular. Tackles, quarterbacks, defensive ends, and defensive tackles. And then they drafted Devante Smith, number 10 overall. So sometimes, trends get bucked, things get broken because just, sometimes it just has to do with the depth of the draft and where that depth lies on the draft board. But I think that's going to be an interesting one in terms of the offensive lineman and where some of these guys fall. Let's talk for a second about the running backs in an RB2 or an RB1, depending on how you want to view the situation in terms of the future. Let's just start with Miles Sanders, and I'll ask you your perspective here about Miles Sanders. Do you see a path forward for Miles Sanders signing a contract extension with the Philadelphia Eagles?
Not as of right now. No, I don't. And that has come from someone who is a big Miles Sanders fan. But look, even though I think if you look at the amount of games he's played, he hasn't missed a whole lot, but he's been banged up in multiple of them. He's, just missed some crucial games at times down the stretch. And this has even been like in a committee at times, or even when he hasn't been running the ball that much or been out there for too many snaps. So I just think the health is a big concern for me with him. Not that he's been like to the extent of a Saquon Barkley where he had a serious injury, but it's just a lot of different things piled up over time. It's like, all right, how much is this guy really going to be on the field for me throughout a full season? It's not to a serious extent, like I said, to some of the other running backs, but I think it just with the position overall and how it's really become an injury-prone position in general in the NFL, that's a concern for me. Also, I just think there are times where he kind of lacks the patience a little bit in the run game and dances around a little bit. I didn't want to believe that at first, but to me, that is something that he needs to continue to get better at. If he just waited like a split second later at times, there's a couple runs he could break for a long way, or even like the one in the Washington game where he breaks off a big run. But if he had just kind of been patient behind Kelsey running 20 yards downfield, he might have been able to break it to the end zone. So there's little subtle details like that I think Miles has got to continue to improve upon. He's an electric playmaker. I mean, when you get him out in space and he's able to, get the ball with blockers in front of him, I mean, he's absolutely unbelievable. But I think that there's some issues there that turn me off from paying him when I could use the money elsewhere.
100%. I definitely understand that. I mean, I like Miles Sanders a lot too. I definitely think he gives you that explosive element to the offense. I do think that the injuries are a concern with him, and I think if there had been a more stable track record of health, you probably can make a more favorable argument for some kind of a mid-level deal for him. Like, hey, as long as it's not, top 8, I would go as far as top 10 money if he was healthy and was giving us that kind of production. But I just think it's a rough sell with not only, once again, having these little nagging injuries that kept you out of games, but you didn't see the end zone. That's a tough sell. That's a really tough sell when you didn't find the end zone, man. That's a really difficult sell to get an extension on. Now, that doesn't mean he won't ball out this year and maybe earn something, but I definitely think that right now the momentum is going in the opposite direction. The guy I'll ask you about then is, what do you think about, Boston Scott? I mean, would this be a guy that you would be trying to figure out some kind of way of getting him back on a 2-3 year deal?
Yeah, I think with Boston, I'm willing to bring him back on a short-term deal. I think with him and Greg Ward, I think their kind of upbringing was obviously similar with the practice squad and coming on the team. And I wanted to see how both of them handle the heavier workload. With Ward, I think we kind of know what he is right now. Boston, I think you kind of know what he is too, but I think what Boston offers is a little bit more than, obviously we're a different position, but I think Boston kind of offers you a guy, look, he's been in the system now for a year. He's been with the team for a while. They know kind of who he is. And I think he's a guy, third, fourth running back. He can offer you value there with occasional snaps. And I think he's also a guy who, if someone goes down, you have a player who you can trust in to go out there and contribute meaningful snaps. And also you have a guy who's just dominant against one opponent 2 times a year in the New York Giants. So that's something that makes me want to bring him back. But I think Boston's good as another guy. If there's another team that is willing to, kind of overpay for him to be an RB2, I don't think he'll be an RB1 anywhere. He's a change of pace guy, but if there's someone who's willing to overpay a little bit, that's fine. I'm not too worried about losing him, but I think he does offer you value there. I don't want him on kick or punt return again. I think that was a bad idea from the start, but we haven't seen him out there in a bit. So that's kind of my thoughts on Boston Scott.
There's 2 premium backs in terms of free agency that kind of strike me as interesting. I don't think the Eagles would make these moves without a subsequent move from Miles Sanders. I don't think you do this as long as you have Miles Sanders on your roster. But I'll give you the 2 names that strike me as they're free agents. These are guys that I think would pair really well with the Kenneth Gainwell and a Boston Scott. Sony Michel from the Rams. They didn't utilize him enough. I like him. I think he gives you that contact balance you're looking for. I think he keeps your offense on schedule. I think he can be a playmaker for you. And then the other guy is Ronald Jones. Ronald Jones II from Tampa Bay. He is technically a free agent right now. I don't know if it'll end that way, but right now he is. Those 2 guys where you don't have a Miles Sanders on your roster, I'm trying to expand the role of a Kenneth Gainwell. I might give a Sony Michel or Ronald Jones kind of a look in free agency depending upon the market. I think Sony Michel, you probably stand a better chance of the market being more favorable. I think Ronald Jones would probably have a pretty decent sized market for his services. But those 2 guys interest me. But I'll give some low key names, some low value names in terms of free agency that, I don't think these are like veterans you bring in to try out to see what happens, right? I mean, guys that have got some reps in the league, they shouldn't cost you too much money, and they might get cut. Truth being is that they're probably one of the 2 or 3 better backs on your team, but you might end up going in a different direction, especially if you draft a guy on top of it. The first guy I'll give you is Matt Rada from Buffalo, former 49er running back. He'll be 27 years old at the beginning of the season. He's had some productive years in the league. He's coming off of a really bad year. out there in Buffalo, but I do think that's a guy that, veteran, back of the roster type guy. I could see it. The other guy is Wayne Gallman from Minnesota now, but I remember him more so from the Giants teams. I thought he got a raw deal with the Giants, and I thought he had a few games with the Giants where he showed that there's some ability to his game. He's 27. I think he'd be a decent back end of the roster type kind of pickup here, guy that you could probably depend upon if you needed to. And then the last guy has familiarity with the system, with the coaching staff, and that's Marlon Mack. I mean, Marlon Mack makes a ton of sense. I could see something like that happening. Injury history with Marlon Mack is really your concern, but he's only going to be like 26 years old. He's still young. When he's been healthy, he's been productive. I know the argument's going to be like, yeah, Gate, I hear you. He's not a bad player, but neither is Jordan Howard. And wasn't that really the argument we just made about Jordan Howard is that he just hasn't been healthy enough on the field to maintain him on the roster, which I completely get. But I'm just trying to judge it from the pattern I saw the Eagles do, where they try to grab these value guys. And we saw that last year, even when they had Jordan Howard. They still went out and tried to pluck, what's his name from the Lions? They re-signed him too. And then
Kerryon Johnson.
Yeah, Kerryon Johnson. Just kind of looking at that pattern and that history, getting a guy that can give you some pass pro, give you a guy that can run between the tackles and can bring some physicality. I could see the Eagles doing something like that. I mean, I don't know if any of those guys are people that I would necessarily say you 100% project to be on the roster. They might be more of those taking advantage of the veteran rules for the practice squad, the same way they did Jordan Howard. But I definitely think that they're worth a look, especially if they're there come June or July, What are your thoughts about some of these players?
Yeah, Marla Mack is the one that comes to mind in free agency, like you said, because of the connection there. Injury history, as you mentioned, that's a concern. But we've seen Marla Mack when he's been on the field, he can provide some contact balance. And he was a guy, as a Temple fan, watched him a little bit in college and really panned out better than I expected, to be honest. Obviously, playing in the AAC, you're going to look electric, but he really got off to a hot start with the Colts, and he was very productive early on. So I think that's a guy who'd be very well on the committee. Yeah, as far as Wayne Gallman goes, I love that you mentioned that name. We saw him just a year ago in 2020 when we lost to the Giants. Wayne was a big part of that win, and finding the hole, and then just after that, it's just all right. Seek contact, drive forward. Seek contact, drive forward. And I think that's something I really like about Wayne. Like you said, I like that you said on schedule, because that really is the type of back that Wayne Gallman strikes me as, a guy you can just kind of, all right, let's get under center. Let's get in rhythm on first and second down, and let's go from there. Not saying he's going to play every first and second down, but I think he's just that guy. All right, let's get back to what we were doing. And yeah, another name I'll kind of bring up who, again, value pick here, Malcolm Brown. Again, I don't know if he'll make it through training camp or anything, but I think he's a guy who you've seen him used in the red zone with Los Angeles and Miami before. Not that we like to run the ball in the red zone very much anyway, but I think that's a guy who, again, value pick there. Gio Bernard, I just think he kind of matches a little too similarly to what Kenny and Boston bring, but I do think the pass protection aspect is there. He's a veteran. He's done it before. So I think that's a guy maybe you kind of bring in there in terms of value. But yeah, I like a lot of the names you mentioned, and I'm interested to see what route they go. I think they will bring in a free agent running back, whether that means re-signing Jordan Howard and Boston Scott or kind of bringing in someone else and going a different direction.
There are a couple names in the draft that I absolutely love. I definitely think the Eagles are going to probably try to pluck a running back somewhere. I don't think that they hate their situation, though. I think that they absolutely love their pick with Kenneth Gainwell. I think they're comfortable with Miles Sanders, to be honest. And I think that they're going to make a genuine effort to get Boston Scott back here. If he's a restricted free agent, they pretty much control his rights. He's likely going to be back here, to be quite honest. But there are a couple of names that, definitely intrigue me as value picks. These are not necessarily saying the best running backs in the draft class. Don't mistake what I'm saying, guys. I'm talking about value picks, guys that are not going to be your Kenneth Walkers and the Tyler Algiers. Those names are probably going to go day 2, somewhere in the second, third round. I think Algier is more of a third round pick. I think Kenneth Walker is more of a day 2 pick. Brian Robinson Jr., I think, is in that category, guys. That's going to go somewhere in day 2. He might possibly slip to early day 3, like in the 4th round, but I think it's far more likely he's a day 2 pick, to be honest. So I do think some of these guys, you got to be careful of. But I'll give a couple of names that I like, the underlying film on. Number one is Abram Smith out of Baylor. Tall guy. I do get a little worried about him getting behind his pads and not running so upright. Highly productive, though. Highly productive coming out of Baylor. A couple other guys I liked a lot in terms of the contact balance aspect of things and keeping your offense in kind of rhythm and kind of into the flow of what you want to do offensively, not getting too far off. Hassan Haskins, first down machine, touchdown machine. Those are the two things that stand out to me about Hassan Haskins from Michigan. That guy gets first downs. That guy gets touchdowns. Like him a lot. There was a time where Breece Hall from Iowa State was a very, very highly regarded running back. I mean, he was in the Heisman conversation a year ago. I don't think he's really that type of player, but let's be real. He's more finesse than power, to be honest. He's got the frame of a power back, but that's not his game. He's a little more finesse. With that said, I think if you get a good enough offensive line around him, he could pop on film to you. I mean, he could definitely be a guy that people maybe don't see coming is like kind of like, you know, he kind of really fell off in 2021. I wasn't expecting him to have like this crazy productive year. The other guy I'll talk about is Cincinnati's running back Jerome Ford. The athleticism is crazy off the charts with Jerome Ford. I got a feeling he might be that running back that tests really well at the combine. But I will say that the athleticism you see in spurts is not consistent on the film. And it kind of shows up in his advanced analytics where you really kind of hope that you would see more of that translated into runs over 10 yards and breakaway plays over 15. I wish I saw more of that on Ford's film, but I know the underlying talent is there. I like him a lot as kind of a early day three. That guy falls into the 5th round. You got to keep your eyes peeled for guys like that. Like, I mean, not all these guys are going to slip and fall into those rounds, but you got to keep your eyes peeled for the guy that does fall. James Cook, I would be so much more interested in James Cook if I was sold on the fact that he's a 3-down running back, right? To me right now, James Cook is probably arguably along with Dameon Pierce. He's kind of that guy that I think could be a really good 2-minute offense back and 3rd-down specialist. I do think that there are the pieces there to make you think that James Cook could potentially be like an actual number 1 running back in the league over time. I just don't know how the Eagles would view him. So I'm a little skeptical to put him too high on the list, but I actually do think he's a good football player. I don't think he's a bad player at all. A couple other names I'll throw out there that I thought were really good football players, but I'm just not sure they're fit for Philadelphia. If we did not have Kenneth Gainwell, Tyler Batty from Missouri would be a lot higher on my list. Very good receiving back. Travis Dye out of Oregon, another guy can really catch the football. Really good receiving back. I think those two guys can give you a ton of use in a 2-minute offense, 3rd-down situation. We kind of had that guy in Kenneth Gainwell, though. That's really my hesitation there because I look at like James Cook and Travis Dye and like a guy like Tyler Batty, and what I think is right away in the NFL, those guys are at least 2-minute offense and 3rd-down backs at the minimum. I know they can fulfill that role for me. It's just we already got a guy fulfilling that role, so I got to project those guys to be potential premier backs in the league, number 1 running backs. And I don't know that I'm ready to give that kind of a hot take. The other guy would be Kyren Williams coming out of Notre Dame. Kyren Williams deserves respect in this conversation as well, but I definitely think that you can look at a TJ Pledger. You can look at a Kennedy Brooks coming out of Oklahoma. Abram Smith. There's some guys, if you're looking for contact balance back, Hassan Haskins, that give you maybe some deep round value, some day 3 value that could turn out to be a pretty good running back in the NFL. Is there anyone from this draft class that in particular interests you?
Yeah, I'll kind of mention, I love all the names you mentioned. I'm going to kind of mention a couple other small school guys. I really like Sincere McCormack out of UTSA. I think that, you know, while he's a little bit smaller in terms of height, he can still pack some punch, and he kind of has that explosive second level factor to him. Like, I know maybe the competition level isn't there for some of those guys, but I still think he's a guy who can break off some big runs. I also like Pierre Strong, who I believe went to South Dakota State where Dallas Goedert went. So that's another guy, you know, he's a little bit taller, around the same size as Sincere. Really nice vision. I think that you get him out into space again. He kind of got that second level ability to him. Devontae Price, you know, I think these are all guys. I'm just kind of talking about later day guys. Probably all these guys are mostly day 3. Devontae Price from FAU. 6'2", 215. He can pack some punch when he gets to the hole. I like that. I think he's a good fit for kind of what the Eagles do here. I think he's a guy who would be a really nice complementary fit in this offense. I think he's a guy who can kind of handle the workload if he's the hot hand, but also maybe you're not going to expect him to be the hot hand every single game. And, maybe he'll have some games where he takes a step back. And then the last guy I'll kind of mention, which I think he's probably not going to get drafted, but Jermaine Martin, North Carolina A&T. I believe he went to the same school as Tariq Cohen, if I'm not mistaken. You would probably know that more than I would, but yeah, look, I think Jermaine, he's got another guy who I think the contact balance is there. I think all these guys, a lot of these guys, the four guys I mentioned, I think their pass protection ability is also something that stands out, which I think, again, pass protection, I think you can't have enough running backs who can do a little bit of everything. I think Gainwell was really good in pass protection, but we've seen the lapses of our other running backs in pass protection at times, especially Corey Clement in 2020. So I think it's important to have some of these guys who can help in that aspect. And it just kind of gives you a little bit of mystery as to what you're going to do. Are you going to send them out on a route, or are they going to stay into pass protect, or maybe they'll just go out on a little delayed route as the check down. So, or maybe they'll go out on a screen too. I think some of these guys are good on screens. Speaking of Ekwonu, like you said, side note, I was watching a video of him that I didn't get to mention where he literally goes out, dives, flops on the ground, gets back up, and goes on a screen that was designed to the other side, intentionally flopped, and then goes out. So incredible mobility there. Another North Carolina guy. But yeah, those are a couple names in addition to the ones you mentioned that I'm kind of looking at. Mine are probably more so under the radar that probably be day 3 or undrafted, but I like those names I mentioned.
There's one last name I have to add in there, or else they're going to pull my NC State certificate away from my fandom. I have to mention Donovan Knight, who I think if he was not in a running back committee situation at NC State, would be way further up on people's list. He definitely forces missed tackles. He definitely can give you some breakaway, kind of playability here. I don't think he's particularly fast. I don't think he's like a burner out there by any stretch of the imagination. I think he's a decent contact bounce back, but I wouldn't call it like Pearson was the contact bounce back at NC State. But, Donovan Knight gives you a little bit of that ability, no doubt about it. He's a guy that I could see as a late day 3 as well, but I was maintaining him to last guy, so that way you guys didn't come back to me. Of course, Steve said an NC State guy. But yes, you are correct that A&T has produced quite a few good running backs, honestly. But yes, that's a very good program out here in Greensboro. A very good football school. So the wide receiver position, I would say, is a position where the Eagles need to get better. They need to improve incrementally over what they had last year. And I think the easiest area to identify here at a wide receiver is a boundary side, X-aligned, guy that can really play in those contested windows, those tight windows. And we don't really have that, mistake eraser on the Philadelphia Eagles team. Devante Smith does a good job creating separation, but I wouldn't call him a mistake eraser per se. Quez Watkins beats man coverage. Still wouldn't call him, that mistake eraser. I'm not even going to mention Jalen Reagar in this conversation. I think we need that guy. I do. And like we talked about earlier, the Eagles have survived with really talented guys that neither were really truly, a boundary side receiver. But I would prefer to have somebody with an Alshon Jeffrey-like ability. I know that the way that the thing came to an end with Alshon was not good, but that doesn't detract away from the fact that when Alshon was on the top of his game in Philadelphia, the offense was a lot different. We were winning very, very competitive football games against very good teams. And I would love to see the Eagles get back to that. Now, we can start with stealing right back from Chicago again. And maybe a guy like Allen Robinson's market doesn't turn out what he is expecting. And maybe a team like the Eagles with a young quarterback like Jalen Hurts and an upstart coaching staff. And, Chicago, Philadelphia, I'm not going to say that they're apples for apples in terms of the cities, but passionate fan bases. He knows what he's getting himself involved in here. I could see that one. I mean, I like Allen Robinson. I do. To me, it's all about the contract evaluation. What is the contract, right? I mean, I will say that I think he's a really good initial separator. I think his initial release is pretty good. I think he's got some short area quickness. I think he's a guy that you could play on the boundary, but you can also play a little tall slot with him. because I definitely think he's got that ability in the short area of his game. I don't love his long speed. I do think some of the reasons he has such great contested catch numbers is because he doesn't have the long speed. I think that's a part of it. But he's got good body control, good body placement. He knows how to go get the football. What do you think about Allen Robinson? What are your thoughts about Allen Robinson? Let's just make that singular, I guess. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I really like Allen Robinson. I know beat reporter Mike Kay has been a fan of him for a while, being a beat reporter who covered the Jaguars previously. And speaking of the Jaguars, you could easily make the case Jalen Hurts might be the best quarterback that Allen Robinson has played with in his career, which, I mean, no, this isn't a diss at Jalen Hurts, but that's really, really sad that a guy who has only played a year and 4 games, that's probably the best quarterback he'll get. I think he's a guy you can throw that back shoulder fade to. Like you said, I like his slot ability too. I think it's nice to have a tall slot or an X receiver who can play that tall slot these days, kind of like, you see A.J. Brown do it from time to time. There's plenty of other guys. Devante Adams does it quite a bit. Robinson isn't as young as he used to be, but I also don't think his age is a huge problem. I think people are kind of making him out to be a little bit older than he actually is. And that happens when a guy's been around as long as he has been. But look, experienced veteran, like you said, we stole from Chicago before. And I think Allen Robinson gives you that guy you can throw a fade route to in the red zone. And he's a guy who has really refined his route running over the years. So also has, I believe he was a Penn State guy, if I'm not mistaken. So that's something a lot of fans would welcome him with open arms. So I think he's definitely a viable option. It just comes down to what his market looks like, as you said. I'm not going to overpay for an Allen Robinson right now.
Sure, absolutely. A couple more names on that list. We can just stick kind of with the whole Jacksonville theme here. And DJ Chark. Another guy, I wouldn't call him he can play the boundary. He's big enough to play the boundary. He's got he's definitely a better long speed guy. Definitely he's got that ability to his game. Can go up, steal the football. I've seen him run some in-breaking routes. I wouldn't say that it's enough film for me to confidently project that he's particularly special at it, but I would give him the benefit of the doubt to see what he can do here. I think the bigger concern with DJ Chark has to do with the injury. Coming back from that ankle, what can he do here? He's had a couple of years where he's been a little beat up, but that guy would definitely improve the receiving core. I don't think there's any doubt about that. What are your thoughts about DJ Chark?
Yeah, he's got the size, and you can see he translates the size into ball skills at times, and body control is just unbelievable on the sideline. There's some wild throws he had to deal with during his time in Jacksonville that you are just you're amazed that he came down with them. I think there's times where he's got to learn to win a little bit more off of technique rather than just his athleticism and speed and size, because I think there's some instances where he doesn't leave himself enough room on the sideline to where he has to make those catches. But look, like you said, the straight line speed is there. You can throw the 9 ball to him if you need to. And I think he adds that element this offense is missing. I would agree he's not technically your bona fide boundary X. He can play it, but I think he's a weapon this offense would benefit from. And I think out of the market, he might be, somewhat cheaper than the other guys because he's not necessarily on that elite tier quite yet, but he's right around there. I would say he's right below it.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that, definitely. One other guy I'll bring up here in terms of talking about boundary side receivers would be Mike Williams, who I think is definitely the premier guy between him and Allen Robinson. I don't know what his market's going to be. Some people tend to think it's going to be very expensive. I don't think it's going to cross over 15 million. I think it'll be closer to probably 10 million, to be quite honest. But I don't know. I mean, who knows? Depends on the amount of interest he ends up garnering. Another guy that I think has the long speed. I think that he was phenomenal at the contested catch at Clemson. I mean, he's been doing this guy since college. He's a mistake eraser. That guy's he is definitely a mistake eraser. I would love to add Mike Williams here. I don't know what the cost is going to be, and I have a number where I would probably walk away as well. But he's going to drastically improve your wide receiver play. Is he Batman? Is he Robin? I don't know. I don't care. I just look at it this way as having Quez Watkins, having Devontae Smith and Mike Williams is not a bad receiving core at all. Even, Jalen Reagar is your 4th wide receiver, not where you want a first-round pick to be. There are worse 4th wide receivers. I don't have their names yet. I'll have to think, but I'm sure there's a worse 4th wide receiver. But nonetheless, I think the receiving core gets a lot better if you can do that. What are your thoughts there? I mean, how do you feel about kind of getting around to a Mike Williams coming to Philadelphia? Like, do you have a number where you say, like, hey, I like Mike Williams a lot. That guy definitely is a vast improvement over what we got, but not at this number. Like, this is too much money for one player.
Yeah, I don't necessarily have a number in mind that I can give you right now. Sorry about that, but no, I think to your point, it takes the mistake. I would say on your point, the mistake creator comes off of the field if you get Mike Williams. So again, like you said, the contested catch ability. I mean, this is a guy who we all were interested in the draft when he was up. I think a lot of Eagles fans were hoping we might trade up for him or he might fall back a little bit. That's a big time playmaker right there. And he makes plays in some pretty crucial moments too. Like you need a play down the stretch, fourth quarter, you can go to him on the sideline and trust that he's going to go and come down with the ball. I think he's good inside the numbers too. So definitely started out a little shaky when he first started his career. I believe he got hurt in his first year, and the pick was not what they thought it would be the first 2 years in, but the past 3 years it's been really impressive to see him and the strides he's made. And I think he's just a baller. He's a baller. That's what I'll say about him.
100%. I mean, the way I view it is judging Clemson receivers, which I get an opportunity to watch a lot of Clemson football. T. Higgins was the better route runner. Mike Williams is the more explosive player. That's kind of the way I look at those two guys. Now, there's some value bin guys I think could definitely play the boundary side or a tall slot kind of role here. Zack Pascal had his best year with this coaching staff. Nick Sirianni is the offensive coordinator. Shane Steichen had nothing to do with him, obviously, because he was with the Chargers, but there's a connection there with Mike Williams. But I will say Kevin Patullo he worked pretty closely with Zack Pascal, and he had Zack Pascal playing very well. I know that it's probably not the pick people want to hear. It's not going to make people feel overly confident about the receiving core just solely adding Zack Pascal. I think it could be a sneaky good pickup, though. I think he's in a situation where it's a no-win situation in Indianapolis for him. Michael Pittman's going to be their dude. And I think he's good. I think Pascal can play. Is he spectacular? No. Do you still probably need to be pretty early in the draft at wide receiver? Arguably. You arguably do. But I think Zack Pascal is a step in the right direction for a receiving core that a lot of guys on this list would be an upgrade over who we have currently on the roster, to be honest. You don't have to dig that deep to find guys that are improvements. It's just the truth to the situation. Is he better than Quez Watkins? I think there's an argument to be made that Quez Watkins is the better player right now. And that Zack Pascal is really a wide receiver 3, although he can play the boundary. But, you could definitely use him for conversion and goal line situations, red zone. He could be that target for you. He can have that kind of role, I think, in Philadelphia's offense. He's not the pick people want to hear, but what do you think? What do you think about Zack Pascal?
I'm really glad you mentioned him. Again, people are not going to love the pick, but look, he knows the system. He's going to come in, and I think Carson Wentz put some bullets on him in the red zone, and he came down with them. He was a guy who Michael Pittman kind of became this guy down the stretch, but early in the season, Pascal was a very trustworthy option for Carson Wentz, who's kind of getting his footing in Indianapolis, which, that's a whole nother conversation for another time. What happened there? Go back and watch a previous podcast. But Pascal was kind of that trusted target, third down guy too, red zone guy. I think he offers you a lot of value in those situations. In the slot too. I think we talked a little bit about the slot at the beginning of the episode, and I think that's something that the Eagles could use right now. I don't know. Do you know anything about, this isn't the most important, but run blocking and kind of where do you think he kind of fits into the Eagles offense in terms of alignment too?
Probably could play a tall slot for you. Definitely could play the boundary. He could play all 3 alignments. He's no limitation in terms of the alignment ability for him. I think he's a better fit along the boundary or as a tall slot, to be honest. But he could definitely play a flanker role for you. I will say that his ability to run block or his ability to block on screens and stuff, he's going to give you a lot more than Quez Watkins. He's going to give you a ton more than Devante Smith. I love Devante Smith's effort, at least. I love Quez Watkins' effort. Those guys are effort guys, but they're not particularly good at it. Listen, I'm not justifying Jalen Reagar's play. There's a reason why Jalen Reagar's, screen passes don't work out. Sometimes it's boneheaded decisions from Reagar. Most of the time it's because he doesn't have good blocking in front of him. When you reverse the role and you got Reagar out there blocking or you got JJ out there blocking, you got much more formidable blockers. So I think Pascal does help you in that regard. Sure, he definitely gives you some of that ability. JJ is a better blocker, to be quite honest. JJ Arcega-Whiteside is, but Zack Pascal's a better, route runner and receiver, to be honest. I don't know what you do here. That might be kind of the end of a JJ Arcega-Whiteside. And maybe they don't. Maybe they say, look, we got Dion Kane. We signed him to a futures contract. He's another one of these big body guys that maybe we want to give an extended look to play that role as a fifth wide receiver and to push JJ potentially either to beat somebody or to knock him off the roster. I think it's possible. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely a side to that. He can block, but I don't think it's like JJ Arcega-Whiteside level. Now, there's a ton of value, guys, okay? And I'll go through them and you just tell me what you think, okay? We'll go line by line. Tell me what you think. Number 1, Chris Godwin.
I like Chris Godwin. I think he definitely kind of adds a little bit of a spark to this offense.
Right. We talked about D-Jack and Macklin and not being a true, not having a true boundary side receiver. Chris Godwin, Devante Smith, Quez Watkins, you don't have a true boundary side receiver, but you got 3 guys that can beat man coverage. That's kind of the way I look at it there. Chris Godwin would be a massive upgrade over what we've had recently. Just a matter of where's he going to be from the ACL. Sometimes dudes aren't right the first year back from an ACL, but sometimes you got to do what you can do to secure a contract on a guy that's that talented. Even if that means, the first year of production might be less than what he can really produce for you. Let's keep Devante Adams seems like a dream to me. I think Green Bay is already starting to make moves to try to get him back under contract. But I will say, okay, Devante Adams might go under contract. But if they do that, it's going to be real hard, even though they control the rights of Allen Lazard. It's going to be real hard to get him under contract. If you also have to get Devante under contract, Devante Adams. So, I mean, what are your thoughts there about, like, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Allen Lazard, like any of those Green Bay receivers?
Yeah, well, first off, Devante Adams, I'll throw whatever we need at him. Premier player. But as far as Lazard and Scantling, I think Scantling definitely gives you a little bit of that speed threat. I think he's an upgrade, again, over what we have at wide receiver 3 right now. In a sense, almost what we hoped Reagar would be in some aspects of his game, not all. Definitely, I think the straight line speed, like I said. And then as far as Lazard goes, yeah, I think he's a guy who has good rapport with Rodgers. He's kind of refined his technique and his route running a little bit over the past couple of years. People were kind of talking about him as a possible tight end option, but I think he's kind of proven he can play the position pretty well. And I think he's a trusted option for a quarterback. So he's definitely someone I'd take over what we have. Both of them are upgrades for sure, and I'd be willing to add them on at the right price.
100% agree. Get into a little bit more complex territory here with some of these guys, right? I don't think that it's as easy to say the fit, but they're good football players. Will Fuller, Miami. He'll be 28 at season's beginning. He had an incredible year with Deshaun Watson just a couple of years ago. Speed guy, speed for days. Not a complete route runner. Is he an upgrade? Yeah, come on. Yeah, he's an upgrade over what we got. But does he fit what you need? I think that's a little bit more argumentative, right? I mean, I don't know that he's going to give you a ton of in-breaking routes. I mean, he might be able to take a slant route to the house on you if you're not careful. I'm not going to say you can't run any in-breaking routes, but, I mean, he's better served running that 7-8-9 route. What are your thoughts about him?
Yeah, I think that Fuller, I think Watkins kind of offers a similar arsenal. Fuller probably does it at a higher level, but how much is he going to be on the field? That's another concern I have. I know the PED suspension was part of it, but also even after that, I think he had injury problems again this year. That's always been a fantasy complaint of fantasy owners too. Can he stay on the field? So I like Will Fuller, but like you said, kind of another straight line speed guy who I think he could get money somewhere else, and I don't know if he's necessarily what we're looking for.
I like this player. I don't think it's the right fit for Philly. He's good. He can play football. Jamison Crowder. I call him the upgrade over Greg Ward Jr. Like, similar players. He's better. He's better than Greg Ward Jr., and I think Greg Ward Jr. could be far more productive if he was just used more. Love him. Don't know that he's the perfect fit here, but he's a veteran guy. He's 28. Can catch the football. He can create separation. He does have a little explosion. He's not – I don't think he's Christian Kirk out of the slot. I don't think he's JuJu Smith-Schuster out of the slot, but he's competent. He can play. Is he a mistake eraser, though? I don't know about that part. I don't know about that part personally. He's not that kind of receiver. And plus, I believe Crowder is a Duke guy, if I'm not mistaken. I don't like those Duke guys, man. What are your thoughts about Crowder?
Yeah, good slot guy. I think he kind of has a knack for developing rapport with any quarterback he's in the building with. We saw it initially with Kirk Cousins when both of those guys were kind of young in the league. How many times we see Jamison Crowder take, or whoever it was, him, Garcon, or Jackson, take it deep on us? But I think Crowder kind of developed a name for himself, and he's very reliable. I agree with you on the Greg Ward thing. Huge upgrade there. You can put him in those third down and the red zone situations, and I think he's just a guy who, while he might not be able to kind of take it to the house anymore or run the post route as fast as he used to be able to, he'll sneak by you if you don't really, or if you're not really on your toes at all. I like him a lot.
100%. T.Y. Hilton, the old statesman, 32, knows the coaching staff, veteran guy, probably still an upgrade. I hate to say it, but he's probably still an upgrade. I just don't know if the Eagles should be overly involved in a veteran at that age. Like, I mean, I think if you had a rookie here on top of it, a little easier sell, right? He's not necessarily a boundary side guy. He's just a really good route runner. I will say that he's going to give you more than what you've had. I mean, I will take a 38-year-old T.Y. Hilton over a 24-year-old J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. I'm just going to be honest. I mean, he's a better football player. With that said, is that the right move?
Yeah, I think that I'm with you. I would have been interested in T.Y. a couple years ago. Right now, I'm sorry. I'm just not anymore. I also, again, we've talked about injuries a lot in this podcast, but it really is true. And I just don't think he's right for the situation right now, because even if you get him in here, I don't know how much he's going to be out there. But yeah, if the market doesn't shape up for him, am I willing to take a chance on him on maybe a cheaper deal? Maybe like a 1 year, 2 year. I'm not thinking anything big. I might be willing to. Right now, I think his projected market value is around $6 million a year. I'm just not sure I'm willing to pay that to him. So am I willing? Yes, but it just has to be at a reasonable price. I'm not too interested in him anymore, to be honest.
JuJu Smith-Schuster, slot guy. We were interested in him just a year prior. Coming off an injury. Does he improve your receiving core? Sure. Absolutely. He's an upgrade. But is it the right fit? Is it what you need? I'm willing to take a chance on a guy. Like I'm not saying that Schuster is a bad fit per se. It's just that you're not really getting that boundary side receiver. It allows you to still play probably Quez Watkins as your flanker. Your boundary side when you want him to play that role. Him and, you could pretty much take all three of those receivers and move them around between boundary, playing the slot, playing the flanker. All three of these guys, Devante Smith, JuJu, Quez. I mean, you definitely could do some stuff with them. I'm not saying the Eagles shouldn't have interest. I don't buy him being a primary target. Does that make sense?
Mm. Yeah, and I think you're spot on that. I think he's again another one of those guys who, in a different way than Chris Godwin, provides a spark. I think that you've seen him take some of those quick slant routes to the house, and I think he's a reliable. Reliability I think is big, especially over the middle of the field, and yeah, I think him and Hurts would do well. I wouldn't add much to what you said. The only thing I'll say is, as a younger fan who's a little more involved in the TikTok culture and stuff, not a shot at you, Steve, but I just can't. I'll be happy if he comes here for the town perspective, but the TikTok antics really, really bother me. It really gets under my skin. So that's what stops me. But I know that's not really going to be something that's heavily considered. But I had to mention that. It's just something I can't even begin to think about how annoying it would be. I had to mention it.
You're spot on. I didn't even know JuJu Smith-Schuster even had a TikTok. So, don't worry.
Oh, he has one.
You're spot on. You caught me. I'll give you a couple of value guys. These are guys I'm higher on than probably most people. Rashard Higgins from Cleveland. Is he a big, tall slot guy? Pretty much. Tyler Boyd type? Yes. Would he improve the Eagles? Yes. Is there concerns about his health? Yes. What do you think about Rashard Higgins?
I love Hollywood Higgins. Him and Baker had a good connection there for a little bit. Obviously, the OBJ thing didn't work out for Baker, so he leaned on Rashard Higgins at times. Yeah, he hasn't stayed on the field a ton. But yeah, if we miss out on a couple of the big names and you want to go in and just kind of have an option there before the draft and just make sure you kind of upgrade that position, I'm all for adding a guy like Rashard Higgins. I don't think that would hurt at all. And I believe he's fairly young, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know how old he was when he came into the league, but
yeah, he's 27, 28ish, somewhere in that area. I'll give you another guy, tall frame, maybe not the most stout guy, about 6'2", 6'3", 200-pounder. At one point was a far more productive player than he's been recently. But I definitely think that if healthy and on the football field, he's an increase for the Eagles, and it's Josh Reynolds. Josh Reynolds is a guy that's probably more so involved in that third market, that third wave of the market. He's probably not a primary guy. You probably can argue he's maybe not even a secondary guy. I'm just looking at the fact of you have to improve this wide receiver core. And you might not get the Mike Williams. You might not get Chris Godwin. You might not get those guys. If you miss on secondary market guys like JuJu Smith-Schuster and say like a Christian Kirk, do you have any interest in a guy like Josh Reynolds? I mean, 6'3", 200 pounds, somewhere in that area, 190, 200, somewhere in that area. He's production has waned here and there, but he's had those moments. He's had those moments where he's been a really good football player.
Mm-hmm. I think I'm interested in him. I want to say he played under Moorhead at Texas A&M. Maybe Moorhead was at Vanderbilt at the time. I don't want to say that for sure. There might be a connection there, but Texas A&M. Look, Kirk, Mike Evans. They had a good wave of receivers there for a little bit, and now I think Reynolds in LA. He was a guy who was able to kind of come through when one of their top three guys went down. When it was Kupp, Woods. And I forget that. I think they had someone else there. Maybe they used Reynolds as the wide receiver 3 sometimes. And I think in Detroit this year, he had a couple games, especially at the back end of the season. They had a couple guys, Khalif Raymond, I think, might have gone down. It was either him or Ross St. Brown. I know Ross St. Brown had a really good end of the season, but Reynolds came through and they needed him to. Obviously, has that rapport with Goff. They've been together before, but yeah, like you said, he's shown the flashes, and it comes down to upgrading wherever you can. That's a guy who I'm not sure, he's definitely not your long-term wide receiver 3, but for 1 year, am I willing to bring him in? Maybe you give him a multi-year deal, but for 1 year, am I willing to have him as my wide receiver 3? I'd be okay with that for sure. Again, if the market kind of shakes out to where we're looking at the third wave of things, and then you add down the road, and then Reynolds kind of becomes a really good number 4 for you, which I think is his ideal role.
Yeah. One more Pittsburgh guy I'll name is kind of that third market, that third wave of the market, just James Washington. Not the biggest guy, but crazy, arm reach. I mean, one of these guys that's 78 inches or more and the wingspan, like he's not a tall dude, but he's got that lanky frame to him to where he actually is quite an interesting matchup, when you play against him. Not special. He's not special. It's not exactly what the Eagles need, but, is he an upgrade over, what we have on the roster? I don't know. I think that he's at least had film at times, but makes me think that as a third or a fourth option on this football team might give you more of a boost than, say, a Jalen Reagar. But I think it's closer. I do think it's a little closer between them two. I don't necessarily think that they're miles apart in terms of their production, but I will say that James Washington has had higher highs than what we've seen from Reagar. Mm-hmm. And I'm not writing Reagar completely out, guys. I'm not saying he's completely cooked. I'm saying if you don't have to rely upon him, you should make this young man earn his way back onto the field with playing time. I think that's the way you handle the situation. You're not trying to cook him. You're not trying to, but you're sending a very clear message. You want playing time, you're going to have to earn it this time. We're not going to consider the fact that you're a first-round pick. You're going to have to earn your way back onto the football field. I mean, what do you think here? I mean, where do you fall in this whole James Washington thing?
Yeah, I like James. I was, as a younger fan, again, before I really kind of started to do some amateur film study, Washington was a fun player to watch in college, and, for obvious reasons, hasn't panned out exactly as good as he was at Oklahoma State, I believe it was. But Still a contributor in that Steelers wide receiver core. I mean, those guys don't mess around with wideouts over there. They want some good options, and they like to bring in guys who can, contribute to the core. I think that says something that he was there and they brought him in, and I think all those guys kind of learn a little bit from each other and try to implement into their games when they're not doing TikTok stuff. So I think Washington, like you said, I think the point we're kind of making here is are they an upgrade? Are they going to challenge guys like Jalen Reagar and Greg Ward and, obviously bump J-Jaw out because you can find special teamers and blockers elsewhere. That's not something that is going to keep J-Jaw around forever. It kept him around this year because of his draft stock, but I think he definitely can be a contributor. I don't want to compare him to Mack Hollins. Mack Hollins was a guy who the Super Bowl year every so often had a couple nice catches for us. I think Washington could do a little bit more than that. More than that, not a little bit more. I think Mack was a rookie that year, and we obviously know Mack Hollins cares more about special teams than being a wide receiver. So, yeah.
So, I mean, I'll just name some other guys real quick. We don't have to go in depth about them. Christian Kirk, we've already talked about. Slot guy, I would put him in the secondary market. Probably one of the better players in that secondary market, to be honest. A lot of explosion from the slot. He's an explosive guy from the slot. Very, very familiar with the coaching staff. He's worked with Kevin Patullo. He's worked with Aaron Moorhead in college. Yeah, I mean, he's a guy that I would have a ton of interest in personally. The other guy that we haven't talked about the Dallas receivers. I'll be honest, Cedric Wilson, both these guys. I mean, look, they're Cedric Wilson to begin with. I think is a little too similar to Quez Watkins in my opinion and what he can do. But if you're really digging down on that third wave of free agency, and he's the best player available, I wouldn't avoid him. Jalen Guyton belongs in that conversation of the third wave of free agency. I would put him in that period of time of when he should be considered. Let me look through the list real quick. There was one more guy I wanted to talk about, guys, that I think is more of a third wave of free agency type player. It's the guy from Zay Jones. Zay Jones, I would say, is a day three kind of wave of free agency guy. I think some of these guys are very similar to Quez Watkins, to be honest, but you're looking for upgrades. I think all those guys are upgrades. What are your thoughts about any of these guys that we just named? Do you have a particular favorite amongst that group?
I do like that you mentioned Zay Jones, the guy who Derek Carr really liked, and I believe he had that clutch touchdown in week 1. So he kind of has that explosive factor to him as well. Obviously doesn't do it at a consistent level, and that's why he'll be a third wave of free agency guy. But I do like him. I think that's a guy who you add to your receiving core. You get a little bit of a spark there, as I mentioned multiple times. And the other guy I'll mention, one last thing, DeAndre Carter, former Eagle. I still love the guy. I know he doesn't exactly fit what we need right now, but I think, it was kind of cool to see him utilized a little bit more in Washington, and hopefully he gets a nice contract somewhere.
And the last guy we didn't really mention, speaking of Dallas Cowboys, would be Michael Gallup. Michael Gallup, I would still put in kind of that first wave of free agency. I would consider him the back end of the first wave. He's a good football player. Michael Gallup's a good football player. He's drastically would improve the Philadelphia Eagles. I know some people don't even want to consider it because he's a Dallas Cowboy, and we've had our struggles with trying to incorporate guys from Dallas. But I think this is a guy that is in his prime. It's not a running back where you've beaten him down in Dallas. He is coming off an ACL. That is kind of the problem. But he might have a little chip on his shoulder if they're deciding to kind of stick with CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper, and he's kind of the fall guy here, especially if they bring back Cedric Wilson to take his role. He might have a bit of a chip on his shoulder. I mean, that's a pretty good motivating factor there. What do you feel about Michael Gallup?
He's a playmaker. I remember 2 years ago, I'm playing basketball with my buddies just in the summer. I'm looking at Michael Gallup 2 years when he's a free agent. Here we are, and I'm really excited. Because of the injury, maybe his value is a little bit knocked just because there's a lot of other options there. And I think you might be able to get him on a nice deal, and then you can ink him. And like you said, if he has that chip on his shoulder, I think he's definitely going to be willing to go to a division rival, especially. That's something I think needs to be mentioned. And outside the numbers, I think he's a good player. He has played that boundary X for Dallas. I think that's something we need right now, as we talked about. And yeah, I think that's a great pickup if you can land him. I don't believe he's been out of too many games outside of what happened this year. I'd have to check that for sure, but I think he's like you said, still young. I would love to add Michael Gallup to this receiving core. I don't care what team he played with before. He got drafted by the Cowboys. He didn't decide to go there. So
100%. Yeah, I don't personally have a problem with it. I mean, I understand the history. It hasn't really worked out for Philly, but we've also normally kind of targeted guys that were a little bit later on into their careers. I like him. I think he's a good football player. I think he drastically improves your wide receiver core. I think teams would have to worry about him. I mean, is he my primary target? No. I mean, I'd much rather have an Allen Robinson or a Mike Williams or a Chris Godwin before I went with, that kind of route, to be quite honest. But I wouldn't rule him out. And he's certainly an upgrade. And, he would definitely, if teams start to become a little too focused on trying to take away Devante Smith, there's definitely going to be some opportunities for explosive plays out of Quez Watkins and Michael Gallup. Those two guys could definitely hurt you over the top. So, I think he's a good football player. All right, guys, we didn't really talk about the draft. If you want to talk about, is there any one particular prospect that you think plug him into this offense and like, wow, this could be something special?
Yeah, Treylon Burks. I really, really like Treylon Burks. He gives me some Deebo Samuel vibes. And when you can add a player of that caliber, I'm not saying he is Deebo Samuel, but a player who can do that and be that explosive guy, yeah, I think you take it. Especially Arkansas kind of used him as a slot guy at times, a motion guy. I think he can play the X pretty well. Like, I think it doesn't matter where you put him. You can get the ball into his hands a variety of ways. I think he is a dynamic playmaker. I think if you put him on the football field, he's going to go out there and make plays no matter what. And their offense is going to prioritize getting the ball into his hands. I think he's around 6'4", 220-ish maybe. Some measurements haven't varied, but that's a guy, you put him into space, you may even be able to use him as a running back like they did with Deebo. Maybe not the best idea in terms of longevity, but he gives you a lot of options as an offense, in my opinion.
Yeah, I definitely, I'm a fan of his. I'll say London has some intrigue, concern about the injury. I will say a lot of times I get very concerned about the Pac-12. I know, JJ, I get it, guys. JJ, I think of Whiteside. But USC receivers in particular have developed and worked out in the NFL. They definitely produce guys. Even, look, Nelson Stinkalore. We can say what we want to say about Nelson Aguilar. The guy was a really good route runner. He's probably been one of the better route runners outside of maybe Devante Smith that I've seen come through the Philadelphia Eagles organization in a while. There's some mental disconnect on hand and eye coordination stuff going on with him in Philadelphia. That was really the bigger issue here. But I always thought he was a good player, right? They've definitely, Michael Pittman's been a really good player. The young man that Detroit drafted, Amon-Ra St. Brown's been a really good player. Like, they've produced dudes. They've definitely produced wide receivers in the NFL. So I do think London adds a little intrigue to me, depending on where he gets drafted. Olave is just, kind of similar to Devontae. Sure, there's a little similarity there, of course. I mean, I don't think he's quite as slight as frame as Devontae. He's not quite that slight in frame, but he's more of a separator than I would say like a pure speed guy. But he gets, the dude, you look at his average depth to target, he gets down the field, man. He's got speed. He doesn't lack it per se. He's a good football player. I think he's a really good football player. If you want to look at value guys from the slot, Sky Moore and Wan'Dale Robinson, those two guys in the slot are very intriguing to me. I think they can do some stuff. We talked about Treylon Burks playing in the slot. Treylon Burks is kind of a weird cross between guys like Michael Thomas and Devante Adams and Keenan Allen. These guys that are 6 foot plus, that they can play the boundary, they can play the flanker. They'll put them in the slot. They'll move them all around. He gives you that kind of versatility, but he's built a little bit like Deebo and Curtis Samuel and some of these other guys that kind of are a little bit more of yak guys in the league, to be honest. So, he's definitely an intriguing guy as well. I kind of agree with you there. Charleston Rambo out of Miami is a guy that not a big frame guy, but a tall guy. I don't think he's going to be like an 80-inch wingspan guy. I mean, we'll reserve judgment until the measurements come in, but I would guess it's going to come around 76 inches or so in the wingspan is what my estimate would be. Underrated value player. I think he's better than people think, and he beat man coverage at a very, very high rate. And that's what really kind of turned me on to his film a little bit, was just how often he was destroying man coverage with a subpar quarterback, to be fair, because De'Aaron King never quite worked out to what I thought he was going to be. And, I look at these guys, I think that there's a lot of talent in this draft class. Dubs from Nevada, pretty good football player. there's another young man. I can't remember his name. There's a few of these guys. Romney from BYU, another kind of guy that adds a lot of intrigue to me. The young man, Highland from Coastal Carolina. He's a guy that's very, very intriguing to me. Watson from North Dakota State. There's some guys in this draft class that maybe aren't round one valuations that I think if you do your homework and you put them in the right situation, maybe you strike gold in the Gabriel Davis and Darnell Mooney type situation. I think it is possible. Quez Watkins. Those three guys all came after, that first, second round. They were definitely kind of more of these a little bit more value picks, right? I mean, Gabriel Davis had made a few people's list, but he wasn't being talked as highly as some of the other guys were. A lot of people question his long speed and stuff like that. And boy, he's been good in the league, man. Darnell Mooney, I was really high on Darnell Mooney's film. As a matter of fact, I said at the Eagles, I was a big Reagar guy. And I said, if you don't go get a guy like Reagar, because I was thinking trade back, maybe get a Reagar. But I was like, you know what? Justin Jefferson's the best player that'll probably be available around our area. But if you don't do that, Darnell Mooney, hey, man, everything you say about Jalen Reagar, Darnell Mooney gives you that same thing in a smaller school in Tulane. He turned out to be the better player in the league so far. Sometimes there is value if you look for it. It does exist out there. Is there any of these guys that you think to yourself and you say, value pick? Man, this guy's pretty good as a value pick.
I like David Bell a lot from Purdue too. I know the Draft Network kind of has him as an X guy. Yeah, I think he can play the X. And I think one thing was talked about a little bit before this year was maybe variety of routes in the Purdue offense. I think he answered some of those questions in 2021. And I think he's a value pick because I think he's kind of getting overlooked over the Londons, the Burks, the Olaves, the Wilsons. I think he's kind of like right behind that top tier almost. And I think he could end up being a steal there. I think that, I love Sky Moore. I love Sky Moore. Did almost everything that Western Michigan offense asked him to. I would agree he's a slot guy. He kind of gives me Elijah Moore vibes this year. Played the X for Western Michigan at times, but I think he's definitely more of a slot guy. And like I said, I think he can run routes at any level of the field. So that's a guy who I really, really like. So and then Dubs too. Like Dubs, your prototypical contested catch guy who you can throw out there and say, hey, go get the ball. And he's going to come down with it more times than not. Him and Carson Strong were really fun to watch last year. That was a special connection. They connected. I can't even count the amount of times they hit each other downfield. So those are some guys I like. I know there's a guy from, I believe Texas Tech, Eric Izukama. I don't know if I said that right. A lot of people are talking about him right now, kind of as a later pick. So that's a guy to keep an eye out for as well.
Yeah, there's a couple of guys that, we left. Jalen Tolbert, Southern Alabama, another young man with the frame, the speed's there. He can play. I will say that he's got a little work to do in his route running, and you can see that he doesn't fare quite as well versus man coverage. But if you give him a bad matchup in terms of the athleticism, he's going to eat a player alive. He's a guy that if you can get him right as a route runner, I don't know where he's going to get drafted because, people kind of know about him now. But prior to the Senior Bowl, I kind of saw him as more of a day 3 pick. That's a guy in day 3 that, hey, that's incredible value, to be quite honest. I don't know if it's going to, he might be more of a third rounder now. I think it's possible he slips as high as a third round now because of his performance at the Senior Bowl, to be quite honest. But he's a good football player, man. Alec Pierce, raw route runner. Mistake. He's a eraser. He's a mistake eraser. He will go up and take the football. He's got a lot of work to do in terms of the route running, but physically gifted. And then Justin Ross, disappointed. I thought earlier in his career he was a much better player than he's been later in his career. Depending how far does he fall? It's one of those situations. How far are we talking? Because I do think that there's a valuation here to where if he falls too far, you got to consider it. You got to consider that just maybe he had a bad run of luck the last year or two, and then maybe you can get him right. He's definitely going to give you the frame you're looking for from a receiver. But yeah, man, I appreciate you so much, Hunter. I know we've been going at this for a long time, so I'm going to go ahead and cut it out so that we can get this edited in a reasonable time here.
Sure.
Guys, thank you all so much for tuning in and watching this. We really do appreciate you. Hunter, once again, thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Coach Steve. I appreciate it. This is a great conversation.
All right, guys, we will see you guys on the next video where we'll figure out the topic, guys. We're going to probably dive down a little bit into some player evaluation type stuff. All right. Next time, guys. Next time. See y'all on Monday, I believe.